You see that over there? The two little birds on my wall
It's
that I'm
super
pointing at?
grainy, but at least it's
Oh.
flowing. No,
Yeah.
I don't see the birdies.
Those two birds, like there's like words under it, says nice tits. Because it's the bird's called a tit. David got it at a farmer's market.
I don't even know what to say to that.
Dude, neither do I. He's like, we need this in our guest room. I'm like, sure, babe. Sure.
He was probably so proud of it, came back home and was like, look what I found.
My husband. All right. So,
Okay, so how was your week or your day? Or you want to do a whole week update or you...
dude, I don't know. I think my week was okay. I got sunburned and I'm really itchy right now. So that's what I've been going through tonight, in addition to like managing people and a restaurant that was a little bit busy but could have been way fucking busier. So that's where I'm at today, and my back is still really itchy. So please excuse me as I handle that situation. Yeah.
Did you put some aloe on that burn?
I didn't. I didn't even put sunblock on because I'm Italian and I usually don't have that kind of issue of burning, but apparently Australia is a whole different ballgame, sans ozone layer. So I'm learning.
I didn't know Italians had black skin.
Oh, damn. Just being
Well, they
rude. I
usually
mean,
don't
I
burn
tan well.
very much.
Yeah, no, I don't.
So
I can't even tell you the last time I
white,
burnt.
I'm going to put sunscreen on. Because I turn into a lobster very fast.
Yeah. I have yet to see that, but I believe you. You're also the person who was wearing a turtleneck in like 70-degree Fahrenheit weather in September in Lake Como, so.
Fair enough. I FaceTime with someone today and they were also saying, how many degrees is it in Riyadh right now? And I said, well, probably 16 outside, and in my room, it's 25 degrees.
Oh my God. Dude, my house is at 19 right now, Celsius.
Oh.
It's amazing. I'm cold, but it's amazing.
I'm enjoying my 25 degrees.
I don't doubt that. And for you guys not watching on YouTube, she has a turtleneck on. Ridiculous. All right. Anyway, Miko, how was your week, boo-boo?
Oh, my week was interesting. Actually, I can't share my week entirely on here.
That's fair. That's totally... She's doing some top secret shit, guys, obviously. So
Obviously.
You're a spy. Very cool. Amazing. Love that for you.
But apart from that part, everything was totally normal. My work colleague left 2 days ago, so I'm going to be handling things by myself from Sunday onwards, because the weekend here, for everyone that doesn't know, starts on Thursday and goes through to Saturday, but we start the week again on Sunday. So that's why, I mean, I feel like I'm working every day at the moment. Which I
Preach. Preach.
I'm not sure how healthy that is for two undefined sacrals.
It's not. It's definitely not.
Yeah. But
all right.
Let me just
turn off your notifications. We need your full and 100% focus. Those words. Okay, so speaking of sacrals, neither of us have one, but we are talking about centers today, which is really exciting.
We are. So we thought that we would introduce a few basics into this podcast still, so that everyone can follow. And so I've prepared a little slideshow, which is not entirely ready yet. So can you just do the introductions to centers? And
you want me to vamp a little bit and you can figure it out? Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, so the way I like to describe it is top to bottom, right? And I think for those of you guys who are relatively new to the human design world, there is a lot of overlap with the Hindu chakra system. So a lot of these may sound familiar to you. when we're going through them. Miko, you may have to fill in the blanks a little bit as to what like a defined versus undefined feels like, because I only have two defined centers as an ego manifester. That being said, I find it's challenging sometimes to explain this to people because I can't feel it myself all the time unless like transits are defining it or I'm around someone who's defining it, but then it's still not my energy, right? So I think that that's also something really important to take into account as we are explaining the centers, whether you have them, whether people in your world around you have them, whether you've experienced them fully, like on your own, in your own energy, or if someone else is around you and you've experienced it in their energy, right? Like there's so many different facets of this and so many different levels of this in which we can experience what a center actually feels like. So, starting with the top, we have the head. That is the triangle that looks like a triangle at the top of your chart, not the upside down one. So, the head is where we take in information from the outside world. If you have a defined head, you are probably going to have not necessarily set opinions, but you are probably going to see things a certain way and take in information a very certain way. Coming from someone who has a completely open head, I like to consider myself open-minded in that sense. And like, I can see both sides of someone's story. I can see two sides of the argument. And it's really challenging for me, I think, to be like a judge in quote unquote who's right and who's wrong with information of that nature. So yeah, that's my understanding of the head. Miko, is there anything else that you wanted to add into that while you're multitasking?
I'm going to share the screen. I'm ready now.
Yay!
So your understanding and your introduction and everything was perfect. Good timing. I hope.
Amazing.
I mean, if not, we will just go with the flow.
I mean, if that's my vibe. I don't know if you can do that. Let me know.
Can you?
Ooh, what a beautiful slide you made, Boo Boo.
Oh, okay. Now I can hear you again. Good, huh? Okay, so here we are in the centers. And before jumping into the head, I just had a few more things regarding the 9 centers. So yes, I also love to start from top and go to bottom. There are other ways to go about it by the most potent center as well, which would be the emotional solar plexus, but we will get to that later, because once that is defined, you're automatically an inner authority, emotional solar plexus inner authority, so an emotional authority. And we have overall 9 centers, so Celestina had already mentioned this, that we are 7-centered beings. Now we are kind of switching to being 9-centered beings. This happened in 1750 something or 1760 something.
I believe you.
This something around those lines. So this is when we switched to being a 9-centered being, and everything in evolution always takes time. So it doesn't just happen overnight, of course, same as the mutation that is going to take place around 2027. But right now we have become more 9-centered beings, and yes, you will see a few similarities with the centers, the chakras, but they are still different in how we interpret them. We have 2 pressure centers, so this would be the root all the way down in your chart. So for everyone that's not watching, this is one of the pressure centers, the square all the way at the bottom of your chart, and the triangle all the way at the top of your chart is another pressure center, which is the head center. Then we have 4 motor centers, which is the root, so again all the way at the bottom, the triangle all the way to the right of your chart, which is the emotional solar plexus, the square in the middle of your chart just above the root, so not the one pointing to your throat, but that would be your sacral. And then we have our inner authority, the ego/heart.
Ayo.
And that would be and that would be the tiny little triangle in between G center or self center and emotional solar plexus. Then we have 3 awareness centers, which is the mind, aka the ajna, the spleen, and the emotional solar plexus. So the emotional solar plexus is the triangle all the way to the right of your chart, the spleen triangle all the way to the left of your chart, and the triangle pointing down below the triangle all the way at the top of your chart. That's the Ajna Center. Okay, I wrote mind, but that's basically the Ajna Center.
Same.
And then we have, well, it could be a bit confusing to call the ajna the mind, but yeah. Then we have 3 awareness centers, which is the mind, the spleen, and emotional solar plexus. So emotional solar plexus all the way to the right of your chart, spleen all the way to the left of your chart, the triangle, and the triangle all the way at the top of your chart, the head center. Okay, I wrote mind, but that's basically the head center.
Same.
And then we have, it could be a bit confusing to actually call it mind, but yeah. Then we have direction centers, which is all the way at the top, which is the head center. And then we have the G center / the self center, which is the square pointing up to the throat and down to the sacral. And then we have the emotional solar plexus again. So these are just a quick overview of the centers. And then I was considering jumping to defined versus undefined, just to get a first understanding of what that even means.
Yeah, I think this is a way better way of breaking it down and more succinct, broad left way of breaking it down than me just being like, blah, 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 blah. Words. Continue.
Well, I think the mix is what is valuable here. So we have defined, and Ra Uruhu, the founder or the person that kind of downloaded human design. So he's the person shared it with the world, and he wasn't much into these spiritual things in life until it hit him with full force. And once this download happened, he just wanted to experiment with it. So before even sharing it with anyone, he just did his own experiments with himself, with the people around him. And he said that when you're looking at the defined centers, you're looking at the student. So this is basically you and your consistent energy flow that you have towards certain aspects. So even if you don't have any centers defined, like being a reflector, you would still have gates defined, which would still give you an energy that you can connect to. It's a bit more challenging with reflectors because when a center is undefined and a gate is coming out of that center, then it's also not very consistent. So for now, we stick to the defined centers, and as I just mentioned, it gives you a certain consistency and it gives you a reliable flow of energy towards these centers and therefore also towards the themes of these centers. And very important to note, because a lot of people, when it comes to human design, they are talking about undefined centers being conditioned, but even the defined centers can be conditioned. The undefined centers, so these would be the centers that are white in your chart and not colored in. The defined centers are colored in your chart. And the undefined centers are the lessons that the student is taking, basically. So these are things that you will get confronted with in life, and you're going to really have to learn your lessons in these centers. And as Celestina has already mentioned, these undefined centers is where you take in the information from others around you or the energies from others around you and you amplify them. Another fun fact is that the undefined centers, they show potential health challenges because this is again where you take in the energy of others around you and you can also take in the low vibrations of things around you. So you don't really have as much of a protection in these centers. And now we come to the head center that you've described already. And this is a lot about inspiration, imagination. It's also about asking yourself random questions. Like, I don't know how you feel about it. Do you have lots of random questions flowing into your head, trying to answer them?
From like the outside world, not so much, but if I have like a designated task to do, probably more so. If that makes sense. Like, I'm not just like a philosopher on my own accord, but if I have something that I need to get done or I'm researching, whether it be for school or work or just something that I'm interested in, then yes, I would probably have more questions in my head that I'm seeking out the answer to. But it needs to be something that, like, oh God, sorry, I'm on a bouncy ball and I rolled. But it needs to be something that I'm excited about and not just like, does that make sense?
Yes. And that's also actually a sign for being deconditioned in certain aspects, because the more questions you ask yourself that are just random, like why and how and what, or all of these gates that could be defined in your head, having these questions come in all the time, it would show that you still need to be deconditioned in certain aspects, because the open head needs to understand which questions are truly for him or her. So to decipher, okay, this is actually a question that I want answers to or that I need answers to. However, you also have the gift of just picking up other people's thoughts, to hear other people's thoughts. That comes with an open head and open ajna, also the ability to, or undefined, doesn't have to be open, but also the ability to download things randomly.
Is it weird to say? We're going to get weird next level, guys, but not that I hear my dog's thoughts, but like, I feel like she and I have this like almost telepathic understanding of each other. And like, it's been like 7 years in the making, right? Like, she and I have been in each other's lives for almost a decade at this point, but I really understand her. And like, she was really depressed this summer, and I was doing my best to like do Reiki for her, on her, to like help her move some of that like stagnant energy. And damn, she was holding on to some heavy shit. I don't know what doggos are stressed out about, but like maybe 2 international moves got to her. But homegirl was heavy. So yeah, I could see that. Again, almost on the line of telepathic, but like not that I'm reading my dog's thoughts. But she's probably the only, I call her a person, she's probably the only being that I experience that with regularly, though.
Yeah, and you had also told me regarding picking up your husband's sacral energy, for example, and this is also a big one that we're going to get to. But because Celestina is so open in her design, she has many places where she can receive these energies from other people. On top of it, as we've already mentioned in the last one, you're undefined, or you're consciously defined from one gate, but unconsciously defined from another. So that makes you, when you're taking both the conscious and unconscious charts apart, it makes you feel like you are a reflector in both of these charts, so both consciously and subconsciously. However, the magnetic monopole, which is the thing that is pulling those two sides together, it's bringing this whole new flavor into the mix that is your consistent energy flow, essentially. But it can be difficult to just connect to even the heart and the throat and the heart.
As we continue through these centers, I'll explain a little bit more about what that feels like and what that sometimes doesn't feel like.
Very good. So the head center is also connected to the pineal gland. So each of the centers, you will notice, just like the chakras, is connected to a certain gland or organ. The next one we're going to look at is the triangle below the top triangle, so the one pointing down towards the throat. And that is the Ajna Center. So the head is all about inspiration, gaining inspiration either from within yourself. So when it's defined, it's from within yourself. And when it's undefined, it's getting inspiration from the outside world. So for someone that is undefined, I would truly recommend surrounding yourself with things that inspire you. Going to art galleries or watching things that really inspire you, reading books that inspire you, listening to podcasts that inspire you. So all of these things, because you get a lot of that inspiration from outside. It doesn't mean that you never get inspiration from the inside. Just like a defined head doesn't mean that you never get inspired by the outside, but it's just a different kind of dynamic.
So your Ajna is defined. What does this feel like for you?
My Ajna is defined, and I'm a quad left in the arrows. We're going to get to that in a different episode, but
Totes.
And I also have gate 5 defined. So all of that is making, it's kind of giving me a bit more of a consistency when it comes to habits and routines and structure. My gate 5 is defined, but it's in an undefined sacral center. So the whole combination of that can, because when my sacral is defined in certain moments, I'm going to be even more dedicated to my routines and habits. And with my Ajna, it's about conceptualizing. So it's about taking in the information, the inspiration that you receive from the head, and making it into something. Usually it also depends if you're connected to your throat, if your Ajna is connected to your throat or not, because the throat is about manifestation. So for me, the Ajna, I feel like I can store things pretty well, and I can create concepts pretty well. I've created the opportunity concept. It's always ever evolving, but I feel like I do have a certain logic and a certain way to just remember a lot of things, and I can share them from within myself a lot of times. So for you, this would still be probably a bit different. How does it feel for you?
Yeah, so having it undefined, because it's not completely open for me, it is just undefined. I definitely lack structure. Like I've noticed that if I put something together, not that I question it, because I'm usually doing it from like a place of this is something that like I very much want to do and like is internal, but I lack the structure for policies and procedures for my own business, for example, right? And like defining what a program looks like that I'm creating for myself. However, if I have a group to do it for, or if I have a collaborator to do it with, or I'm doing it for like the greater good to provide them resources, damn, I can do it, right? So it's very interesting, not just how this presents, but how it presents specifically within my design, only having one channel that isn't fully conscious. So it's really interesting the way this plays out, because I haven't worked for someone else in like probably a decade. And now within this last month, I've started a new position where I'm a manager, which is dope, but I also have a team behind me. So I feel supported, which is huge as a manifester, right? So yeah, I'm seeing it present different ways that I'm used to. And that's really interesting. I have the ability for structure. It's not something that comes easily to me. And I find that oftentimes I have to bounce between 2 or 3 different tasks to be able to get things done, rather than just like spend a whole day on one task, if that makes sense.
And as you can see here as well, it really does depend a lot on what the rest of your chart looks like. So all the information that we're sharing here regarding the centers, it can have such a different impact depending on which channels are defining the center, or how does the rest of your chart look like? Because, for example, your chart is also, you have 2 left arrows, 2 right arrows, and that also plays a huge role into the structure part, into data processing, into how to even get the information out of you. Because for you in particular, you function best when someone is pulling out the information. So I like to describe it that someone like you, they have this library in their head and they know so much, but they don't have the library access card to their own library. But other people around them, they do. So if I just know if I just have the question and I just access your library by asking you the question, there's a lot of wisdom that can come out of you.
Dude, you're so right. I'm like a library with a lost library card.
So, for the ajna, we then also have the glands. This is the anterior and posterior pituitary gland in this case. And yeah, as I said, it depends on how it is defined. Also, depending on which channel, for example, is defining it, you're either more logical or more creative in your processing approaches as well. That doesn't mean that you have to necessarily be an artist, because marketing can also be very creative, but it's just that you have either a more logical or a more creative approach to things. The next center we're going to be talking about is the throat center. So this is where we have a manifester, so that's all about the throat. So, would you like to share something about your defined throat?
I like to say the things. However, okay, so you know what? Maybe let's go with little kid Chell, because homegirl was singing all the time, saying a bunch of random stuff, and not giving a care in the world about what other people wanted her to say. I was like watching home videos this summer with my mom after her surgery, or I guess this past summer, because it's summer for me again, but summer 2023, Northern Hemisphere. Let me be very specific about that. And dude, I was wild. And like my grandma would be like, "Oh, Chelly, say this." And I'd be like, "Nah, dude, like I'm gonna march to the beat of my own drum." So I feel like that is in its purest essence, before I was tainted by society and conditioning, what a manifester is here to do, right? Like, especially coming from me, ego manifester, only having that one channel. I was just speaking from my heart. I was singing from my heart. I was ridiculous. And whether I pronounced it correctly or I didn't, I said it, right? And like 3-year-old me was wild. Granted, now fast forward like 30-ish years, and what this feels like is speaking from the heart. And there are some days where I don't say a word. And that's really interesting, I think, for someone who has a defined throat. But there are some days I just like sit in silence, and like maybe I'll talk to my dog a little bit. But that also means that I'm not feeling a pull to speak, because I don't have it in my heart to say anything about whatever topic it is, right? That also could mean that I'm burnt out from whatever I'm doing if I'm not speaking. But I found that in particular with the only channel that I have and the connection at the throat with 45 is the I have statement, if you will. And I noticed that when I use I have, or the other gate that I have out of my throat is I believe, when I use both of those statements, whether it's conscious or unconsciously that I'm using them, they have a greater impact with the people that I'm speaking with. And it's really beautiful to be able to inform people like of that when they have a gate defined in their throat. It's really cool to see how it feels for them, because I know I've felt it, whether I smoked weed and felt it or felt it IRL, like in my day-to-day. I've noticed that those words, when I use them in sentences, or when I'm working with clients or talking on social media, or even here, right, like talking in a podcast, I notice that they're like so much more impactful than if I were to use the other statements within the throat center that I don't have consistent access to. So that was a really long explanation about what it feels like then as a child, like looking back and reflecting, and now. But I think knowing what you have access to in your throat is an absolute game changer for the impact that you can make in your life.
Yeah, that was very well explained. Thank you very much.
Thanks. The only thing I have access to consistently, so happy I was able to bring some insight there.
Well done. See, and this is what we go back to when we talk about pulling something out of someone. See the wisdom that was just unleashed. Absolutely true. There are different gates coming out of the throat, and depending on which ones are defined in your throat, if you have a defined throat, definitely look into the statements that are connected to these gates, because that is where you have the consistent energy to express yourself this way. And this is also the way that your authentic self can come out most. So by just look into each gate that is defined in your chart. We're not going to mention all the statements here because it's just going to make this very long, this video.
I mean, it will, but also, damn, guys, so impactful. You know what? Look at our Instagram page and we'll post about it. We'll post it as like an actual post, not just like a story post, so you guys can see it.
Ooh,
trying to give people the resources, man.
Yes. Which is also another point when it comes to you being able to create a structure and a process for other people, because this is, again, providing them with resources. So that's what I mean when you have to look at the whole chart. You can never take a chart apart. There's so much dynamic in the chart that needs to be considered. So
definitely. Yeah. I think the other piece of this, right, the undefined throat, I think is such an interesting juxtaposition, if you will, right? Because someone with a defined throat can share their knowledge, their insights. But recently I met a podcaster who has a completely open throat. And I know your eyes are getting big for those of you who can't see on the YouTubes or just listening on the podcast. Yes. However, she hosts a platform for other dietitians to share what they're doing, and so that clients can find the person, whether it's of the same descent, right, ethnic descent or country that they've been from. They're basically finding the dietitian that fits them and their needs, and she has a space to amplify their voices and what they're doing. And then she also has the podcast to literally amplify other people's voices. And it's so interesting listening to her shows, because she really just lets the people who guest on her show share everything, right? And especially if they have a defined throat, you can definitely tell the difference. But it's really beautiful what she brings to the space, because she really thinks through the questions that she asks before she asks them, and then allows the person to respond in such a beautifully open way, because that's what she's here to do. So it's really cool. Just because you don't have a defined throat, you could still potentially podcast if that is something that you wanted to do. It may just look a little bit different than being the sole host of a podcast.
100%, yes. So a completely open throat without any gates coming out of the throat center, and also no gates pointing to the throat center. That is extremely rare. So that is because the throat has one of the most gates coming out of it, if not the most. There's just so many possibilities of it being defined, or at least has a few gates coming out or gates pointing towards it. So that takes it to a very complex level. But if you have a completely open throat in the sense that there are no gates coming out of the throat, that means that you have the ability to use all voices. So you don't focus on just one singular voice or statement, for example. You really have the capacity to use it all. And having an open throat a lot of singers actually have open throat, so they can change their voices. They don't have a certain style sometimes, or it changes throughout their life. There are just so many possibilities when it comes to the open throat, but what is very important is to wait for invitation to speak. So otherwise, an open throat or undefined throat can be very blabbery. So they talk without an end to it. They don't know when the right time is to speak. So this would be a very conditioned, undefined or open throat, when there is no clarity on when to speak and not waiting for the invitation. This can also happen with a defined throat, a conditioned defined throat, just not knowing when to speak and just overpowering conversations. So I also find this very interesting with our dynamic, because you are a manifester, so an ego manifester. I'm an ego projector, but I only have my ajna connected to my throat, and my ego is connected to myself or my G center. And what I also love about this podcast is to just observe each other and ourselves as well in this, and how we interact with one another in a podcast situation. I find that really interesting.
I think as long as there's no lag, we do a pretty good job just like having a conversation.
True, fair enough. Well, we also define our sacral together. Because
oh yeah, we do.
You have the gate 15, I have gate 5, so...
Is that how I can record at midnight my time? Probably. Props.
So.
And also, dude, this podcast gives me such life that, like, even if it's after a long day, like, I've been going since 9 a.m. my time, and it's midnight, which is, like, what is math? 15-hour day so far. Like, I'm so, like, stoked on this. So I think what gets me here is just, like, straight up ego willpower, and then what keeps me going is together we define the sacral.
I like that. Yeah, and it's fun.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and that.
Well, yeah, the sacral can only give energy when you're doing something that is satisfying to you. Otherwise, even if you have all 4 motors defined, you don't have the energy if you're not using the centers properly.
Yeah.
So yeah, the throat is connected to the thyroid and parathyroid.
Oh, you Germaned on us there.
Yep. I did my health practitioner in German, so sometimes the medical terms are going to be thrown out in German. But yeah, so that's the connection to the gland. Then the next one we're going to be talking about is the self center, or the G center. It's called either or. And it is connected to either direction or love. So it has a lot to do with identity and higher self and spirituality as well, but it's really mainly about direction and love. And that is the square that is pointing up to the throat. So it's the one that is kind of looks like a diamond in your chart. It is connected to the organ, the liver. And it is where the magnetic monopole resides. So this is where both of your conscious and unconscious sides are being pulled together, and they kind of form you as an individual. And I find this super interesting when it's undefined, actually, because, so mine is defined. Define it with my ego center, so my heart center. And I find the undefined interesting because you're like a chameleon. So it's kind of, no matter who you're around, you kind of pick up their identity, or the way that you dress maybe, or yeah, it's fascinating to me. So if you have anyone in your life and you're feeling, oh, why does she keep changing, or why does he keep changing? Why is he never just, or she never just this one individual, different dress styles, different ways of being, not also shifting in who they want to be depending on wherever they are in their life, especially environmentally, wherever they are, like location is the major thing for this center here. Make sure you surround yourself with people that you want to be like, because if you're surrounded by people that are doing drugs and are just going into the wrong direction in life, you have a tendency to also go into that direction, or it's going to just be harder for you to take the right decisions for yourself. It's also a lot of times people that are constantly looking for spiritual aspects or guides, people that are looking for coaches. They just keep searching for themselves and their identity outside of themselves. And this is a conditioned G center, because you would then just continue searching, trying to find your identity, but there is nothing to latch onto. You're here to always shift and flow and move and change in who you are.
It's so interesting that you find that interesting, because I find it so interesting to have a defined G center and just be who you are, regardless of the environment, regardless of where you are. Like for you, for example, I'm going to go back to the turtleneck just because I see you wearing one, right? Like whether you're in Saudi Arabia and it's hot as balls, or you're in Lake Como and it's hot as balls, or you're in Germany and it's cold as shit, and you have like not only your turtleneck, but then like 3 scarves wrapped around your face. Like I'm just talking like straight up, like what you're wearing, like that is so inherently you. And it's so cool to like see that and to know that you are who you are regardless of who you're with. Like that's just you. And it's really cool, like on the opposite end of the spectrum, to see that. Because in the last 4 years, I've lived in 3 different countries, 3 different continents. And I can tell you for a fact that my wardrobe and my fashion has changed significantly with every move. And like Germany made me classy, and now I'm back in like beach life and I look like a hobo again, you know? So it's really interesting to see both sides of it. And like, not that I want to be a defined G center, but it's really interesting to see your take on it versus my take on it.
Yeah. Coming from someone that's defined and someone that's undefined, it is very interesting. I mean, I'm also happy that mine is defined. I am not envious of it being undefined, but it's just fascinating to me to see it. And I can see that there is quite a challenge to that as well, having it undefined, because the world around us keeps telling us you need to find your direction, like figure out what you want to do in life. Just stick to something, for God's sake. Like these are the sentences that you hear so often. And it's just not accurate for the undefined G center. So this conditioning to let go of that, I can see that, or I can imagine that being very difficult. And with every center, you can be conditioned even when it's defined. So
yeah. And I think I would say like probably 4 or 5 years ago, when I was like still working with business coaches, I haven't in so long, but when I was still working with them, that was before I understood my design. And I thought that the answer was elsewhere, right? I kept seeking the outside, like, yeah, they have the answer for me. They can show me the direction that I need to go in. That's all I need is the direction, right? That same statement over and over again. And now, again, going back to trusting and knowing what my inner authority is and being able to make decisions that feel good for me, and knowing what a heart pull feels like for me, I think has been such a game changer. So there's definitely a lot of deconditioning that I've done, but also if you guys are listening out there and some of this is resonating to you, leaning back into what your inner authority is, that inner decision making, I think will bring a lot to light for you as to what your direction is. And it really breaks down to like what the rest of your chart is saying too, right? And like how to listen to the different centers that are sending you different messages if you're open to it.
So true. Yes. And For everyone that is undefined in that center, it's the visual imagery that I like to give in this case is that imagine you're on a river and you have your little boat and you step onto your boat and the river is taking you down the stream, and then there's a pitchfork coming and you have the choice to go left or right. The river is trying to push you to one direction, but you want to go into the other direction. Don't. Just go with the flow. The undefined G center is here to go with the flow, and as long as you're in the right place, it's really about being in the right place at the right time for you, being surrounded by the right people. And it's not about you trying to force a direction. It's not about you actively trying to find a direction in life. It's really about right place, right time, and going with the flow.
We have to put all of these Mikoisms into a book.
Maybe, depending.
Yeah, it's 100%. They're beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Alrighty, what's up next?
Ours.
Ooh, yay! Fun! Yay! I've been waiting.
Now.
You guys can take a break if you want. Just pause us and come back if you really want to. We're kind of almost halfway there. Not really, but it's going to be great.
Well, then I invite you to start.
Oh, me? Yeah, so I feel like ego center gets such a bad rap just because ego societally has such a bad rap, but you can also call it the willpower center or the heart center or the self-worth center or the material success center. Ooh, I love that phrase. Thanks for putting that in there. It sounds beautiful. Yeah, this is definitely a bit more of a me center, but what I've witnessed is that it's a me center in a good way, because if you are an ego authority, or if you just have a heart defined on your chart, even if you got other things going on, there are times that your heart will guide you towards a kind of selfish choice, and that's okay, right? There is literally nothing wrong with choosing you when you need to choose you and filling your cup first. So what this feels like defined, Miko and I have probably said it on all 3 episodes now, but she explains it as a heart pull, and I like to visually explain that as like the Care Bears from the 1990s, like with their like hearts like glowing and then like extending outward. And so funny, last week Miko sent me a text and she was like, oh my god, I have to give this to you in person, but she found a Pez dispenser.
I didn't even know those heart, still existed.
Care Bear. Dude, I forgot Pez were a thing. I'm so excited though.
I'd show it, but it's far away.
Yeah. It's okay. But that's I think the best way I can feel like what a heart pull feels like if you have a defined ego. On the opposite end of a spectrum, my understanding of an undefined ego, and you can correct me if this is incorrect, but it's feeling as though like there's people pleasing around it, as well as the need to like find the answer, kind of similar to what I was explaining earlier, right? Like that identity center piece, but like that someone will be the savior for you is my understanding of the undefined ego. And I don't know what this feels like to be undefined, since I'm so defined. But I'm sure you have more words to wrap around that than I do.
Well, yeah, that's all correct. To me, it feels like love. So if making a decision for me has to come from my heart, and I need to love this decision. I need to really want to do this decision. And in my life, yeah, we've talked about this in the other episode as well, that there were so many times that I made a decision that didn't seem rational at all, and it wasn't rational. I mean, it wasn't logical, but it's what my heart really wanted, and there was no way anyone could talk me out of it. It was that, or it was the highway. Like that, those were the choices. And it's really if you have it defined, and if this is your inner authority, then ask yourself, is this right for me? Is this correct for me? And yeah, it does have a bad rep, but essentially you really need to fill your cup first, as you have said. This is so true, and this is so necessary for the undefined, for the defined or inner authority even. So what also comes down to this is that if you do have it defined, you need to understand that you have a lot of willpower. And if you are with someone, or if your friends are undefined, or your family members are undefined, and you're not around them, then they won't have the willpower sometimes, because this is inherently built into us. So we consistently have willpower, and some people just don't. And me as a coach, I really need to understand this dynamic, and I also say this to my clients, because if they feel like when they're working with me actively and they feel like they have all this willpower, but then they leave my energy and suddenly they fall into a slump, this is really detrimental, and it needs to be something that needs to be explained if you're working with people. So when we're hosting our retreats, we're also giving this disclaimer that, yeah, you might feel like you can do all of those things, like you made a list and you're going to do all of that once you reach back home. Great. Yes, it's good to have goals, but just be aware that if your heart is not defined, that you may not reach these goals as quickly as you felt you were going to during the retreat, and you may not just have this consistent willpower going for you. The other thing that comes with the undefined will, so 30% of the population have a defined will and 70% of the population don't. So that means that 70% of the population shouldn't make any promises. This is another thing. People think that making promises is something that everyone can and should do, and we're even being blamed if we're not keeping the promises. And if you don't have a defined heart center and you continuously make promises, it is going to really have a physical impact on your heart even. It's not healthy for you to make promises, and this also goes to making promises of being together forever, like marital vows, for example. And we're being conditioned inconsistently going into that direction. So just be mindful of that.
Dude, okay, I got some stories on this. Neither of my parents are defined wills, right? They are part of the 70%. They are hella emotional. But like, so my dad like put off repainting one of the rooms in the house for like months. I come home and within 3 weeks he knocked out like 10 different projects in addition to painting. Wow. I'm like, dude, you literally just need my physical presence. It is insane. My mom's like, I've been trying to get him to do this for months. You come home and it's done. I'm like, yeah, literal my physical presence. Homeboy, Jesus, my husband, didn't unpack for like 4 months. Like after our stuff got here from Germany, I was here for a week. Everything was unpacked.
Or because he unpacked it?
Yeah. I unpacked it. But I also can't live in a place that doesn't feel like home. So, yeah. And like, I know what I want and I'm going to do it regardless of how long it takes, right? Like unpacking the house was 100% willpower. 100% willpower. The other thing that was 100% willpower that I should have let myself not follow through with. So last summer I hosted like a 15 city tour, like a crazy person. Yeah. And halfway through, not even halfway through, maybe 5 out of the 15 in, my heart wasn't in it anymore. And I just kept going. And I did it because I promised the people on the interwebs who purchased tickets or whatever I promoted to, right? And like, I felt like I couldn't go back on my promise. because I never go back on my promise, right? So not only was I only running on willpower to get that done, but I was also keeping a promise that I felt like I couldn't let go of. So I think to my detriment, in all honesty, like in hindsight, right? So it's really interesting when you are running on willpower. It's not sustainable, like sacral energy, like we'll talk about in a little bit. It's not something that's sustainable, especially if your heart is no longer in it. It's not something that's sustainable. It's something that's going to lead you to burnout real quick if your heart's not in it. So I don't know if I would do it differently again. I think I would bring another person on board so I could feed off of their energy rather than quit something, because quitting anything is an emotional roller coaster for me because I promised, whether it's myself or someone else, to do it. So yeah, I think that's also something really important to reflect on, whether you have a defined ego or not, or you have people with defined egos in your life. That I think will just give you a little bit more insight as to why they may seem so headstrong in their decisions.
Yes, and you mentioned also another really, really important point. If this is your inner authority, you may be able to do a project which runs for a few weeks or a few months, and you may have the energy to stay up for hours and hours and hours on end and work like a crazy person. But just remember that after the project is over, you need your break. You need to recuperate, and you can't just jump from one thing to the next, because this is really going to break you down. So just be mindful of, if you're traveling a lot, to always have a break in between to rest. Or also if you're doing many projects, just give yourself the rests in between. So then we have the glands, or the organs of the heart center, which, as you can see, it's 4 if you're watching this. And it depends on which gate is defined in your heart center. So, or undefined as well, if you have challenges in some of these areas. So if your stomach, the gate 40, for example, is undefined, you may have a tendency to have more stomach issues. It also depends on which planets are defining it and if it's a channel that is connecting to it. But gate 21, for example, is the seat of the heart. The gate 26 is the thymus gland. The stomach, as I said, is gate 40, and the gallbladder is gate 51. So we're just going to leave it at that, but I just wanted to do it just to keep this in the same format as the other centers. But as you can see, it's quite complex in itself as well. Then we have the spleen. This is another very interesting one. So we are both undefined / you're completely open in your spleen center. At least you don't have any gates coming out of it. And this is all about immunity. It is also about your lymphatic system. So as you can see, the gland and / the organ, in this case, it's, two organs more like. So we have the spleen and the lymphatic system. So it's really about your immunity, but also your intuition. If it is defined, you are a very spontaneous person if this is your inner authority. So if you have your emotional solar plexus defined, especially if your emotional solar plexus is defined unconsciously, this can be super, super tricky. Because if your spleen is consciously defined, you may feel pulled to be spontaneous and to just decide like that. And this would not be good for you if you have an emotional solar plexus that is defined. But yeah, the spleen is another really interesting one for me when there is a dynamic of being defined versus undefined, which I will explain in a relationship perspective in just a short while, but I would like to know your experiences with a completely open spleen.
I have a question for you after this too, about an experience we mutually shared that was really intense spleenically. Yeah, so having a completely open spleen, has been very, very interesting. I think now that I've had time to reflect, because I've had intuitive feelings about people that I'm close to my whole life, but I didn't recognize it as such then. So before every grandparent of mine passed, all four of them have passed since, but before every one of them has passed, or like in the days leading up to their passing, I've felt some type of like intense pain in my body in some way, shape, or form. Some of it was like lower back, like sciatic pain. Some of it was like hand pain that had never been there. And it was very, maybe not so much in the moment, but like it was very evident that it wasn't my pain. And that was really interesting. But then once either that grandparent passed or I found out that they passed, the pain was immediately gone. So it was really interesting that I felt their passing in that way. And then when I found out, it released. So that was really interesting. And then also a couple of years back when my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer, I had, or rather re-diagnosed with breast cancer. It wasn't the first time, it was the second time that I felt it. I had this like real like tightness like along like my left breast, I guess. And that lasted for like probably a month. And then she got re-diagnosed and it didn't go away then. But as her tumor started to shrink, because she was on like some type of medication to like help the tumor shrink, the pain went away from me. So that was really interesting. Yeah, that's the way it's kind of presented itself. And again, kind of being really in tune with my dog and like what she needs and like what she's feeling. But yeah, it's this intuition that I'm really trying to tap into more, try and understand when I can feel it. And sometimes it's related more emotionally, I think, and feeling what people are feeling in the moment as they're talking about something. Actually, a really beautiful one that I experienced earlier, again, summer 2023, Northern Hemisphere. I was walking my dog with my mom and we came across this like school, like outside day, or like, what do they call those? I don't know. They like go outside and like a field day. I was like, they go outside in the field. It's a field day. And there was probably like 300 kids just like running around, like having the best day of their lives. And I just like started tearing up. Like, this is what joy and happiness feels like in like its most beautiful, purest form. And I'm just like sitting there watching kids on their field day freaking crying. I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? But that is, I think, the intuition that I can feel, right? Like I can really, if people are feeling joy around me, I feel it. And it's the most beautiful, pure thing. I actually felt it tonight. There was someone celebrating their birthday, like at the restaurant that I work at. And this grandmother gave her granddaughter a bracelet. And I just like saw the exchange and I felt like the joy that was happening in that moment. And it was just so beautiful. So
well, that would be more the emotional solar plexus,
very different.
But you're undefined there as well. So, yep, I can see how you're picking that up.
Yeah. So, dude, I just feel all the feels.
Yeah, you do. I mean, love.
Yeah. So it's
G-center. Happiness, joy, sadness, emotional solar plexus, pressure, stress. Root center, health, spleen, sexuality, sacral.
Yeah. So it's I think it's just in that instance, it's tapping into who I'm close to. And then I think extending out to just being open to feeling what other people are feeling as well. I'm going to shoot the question that I had earlier for you back at you. So yours is, what gate do you have coming out of your spleen?
57. And that's a good question. I have to check my chart, projector.
The projector don't know shit about her chart.
Yeah. This is a typical thing, by the way, that people say about projectors. They don't know their chart very well, but they know other people's. And this is also what we're here for. I mean, we're here to get to know ourselves also through other people. Not trying to make any excuses at all right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have gate 57.
Okay, so
at least.
Anyway, let's go with that. Let's say you have at least one gate coming out of your spleen,
more,
right?
But just don't know the other ones right now.
Amazing. The first time Miko and I met, maybe this was like 3 days into like having met in person, we were going through some like human design stuff, some like stick figure release, intense energy, like burning things. It was an epic weekend, let's be real. Or week, really. It was an epic week. But there was one moment where I just had this like intense, I don't even know if it's an emotional release. Yeah, let's go with emotional release. And she literally stood up and backed away. It was like, what the fuck just happened? So I would love to know, in that moment, what did that feel like for you?
Well, we had two completely open splenic centers, and I was undefined, and then we had one defined spleen in the room. And it was just so wild because I felt like this exercise was it was a very intense energy release exercise. That was the first time that I did this exercise with a group of people. Usually I request people to do this by themselves, but in this case we just decided to share that moment, and I felt like it was just, the energy was bouncing back and forth throughout this whole room, and at some point it was just so overwhelming that I really had to distance myself. So when you have undefined centers, the best thing that you can do when you feel like you're taking in energies from someone and you know that this is not in your chart, you know that this is not defined, so you recognize the sensations, the emotions, as I just told you earlier, there are many different kinds of emotions, and not all emotions are situated in the emotional solar plexus. So in this case, it was really just very overwhelming, and I had to step out. I had to leave the room because I felt like I was just being bombarded by energy, and I also teared up for a second, and then I thought, okay, I need to distance myself, and that really helped. But it was very interesting, very intense.
It was also really interesting because the one person in the room with the defined spleen was just like, what happened? I didn't feel anything.
Yes, she was like, what? and I don't know if she has an emotional solar plexus defined or not, but she does.
Yeah. She's an emo MG.
Ah, okay.
Yeah,
that explains it as well. So I think it was, as I said, in this instant, I think it was just a mix of all of that. So
yeah, it was intense.
Yeah, very interesting. The bouncing back and forth, and yes, her face was just like, what is going on? I don't get it.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. I don't think you've touched on it, and I could be wrong if you have, but the relationship side of things when there is a defined spleen, I think is really interesting, if you want to elaborate more on that.
So when one person has a defined spleen, their energy feels very attractive. And if you have an undefined spleen, it feels even more attractive. So the defined spleen has charisma, and they often understand what is good for them health-wise. This is when the spleen is unconditioned. So that being said, because of course a defined spleen can also make all the wrong choices. However, most of the time the defined spleen will pump the brakes when it's really getting super critical health-wise, if you're deconditioning yourself. So with a defined spleen, they also make very spontaneous decisions if this is their inner authority. So they seem very attractive to an undefined spleen. So knowing this dynamic is super, super important in your relationship, understanding if your partner has a defined spleen and you have an undefined spleen, or vice versa. Because what can happen in such a dynamic is that the defined spleen will kind of nitpick on the undefined spleen, and it can even be pretty mean in certain situations. So you can really feel like the relationship is unhealthy if this keeps going on. And the undefined spleen, however, latches onto feeling the defined spleen, because the defined spleen feels safe as well. It feels comfortable. It feels good to be around the defined spleen. So really understanding this and knowing this about yourself, about us as well, knowing that we have undefined / open spleens, it helps us to see the warning signs and be like, hey, okay, you're not being nice to me right now. I mean, I don't want to leave you, but I know this is unhealthy, so we need to talk about this, we need to figure this out, and we need to change this dynamic. So, yeah, this is what the undefined versus defined relationship can look like in the warning signs.
One of my really good friends, her husband is a 2/4 splenic manifester. And yeah, and I was trying to explain, not like why he is the way he is to her, but I was just trying to give her some perspective. And I think that was really insightful for her. I didn't share it with him, but I think it was really insightful for her. And the spontaneity of decision making is very interesting in him in particular. And guys, we can like probably delve into so many different charts and like do a whole episode on just like one chart, which we will probably do in the future. But
for sure,
with him in particular, it's really interesting because like the 4 line doesn't want to leave something until there's like security, but the spleen wants to be spontaneous. The manifester, I'm sure, is wanting to be a little bit more spontaneous to the downloads that he's getting and having like that intuition towards. So it's very interesting to see a splenic manifester with a 4 line needing the security for something else, but also having this like propensity for being more spontaneous. So yeah, just so interesting. So I appreciate that other insight that I didn't realize, the spontaneity.
Yeah, this is a heavy conditioning in splenic inner authorities. They want, like, their nature is to be spontaneous, but they're being told, don't make such rash decisions. And even if a splenic inner authority, and especially if they have an undefined G center, if they go to a restaurant and then they stand in front of the restaurant and suddenly they feel, no, this is not right, this doesn't feel good, I need to leave. They need to follow this instinct. This is good for them. So, but this is really something, if you do this in social situations, people are looking at you and they're like, what are you doing? You can't just leave. And they're going to put all of those bad thoughts in your mind and make you feel bad about your decision.
They're going to make you should on yourself.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move to the next center, the sacral. The life force energy. Well, it gives you unconditional life force energy, or unperpetual life force energy, I would say, if you are doing something that satisfies you. So that is a very big if, because a lot of people, when they have motors defined, they're like, okay, yeah, but I should have all these energy and I don't. So why is that? I'm a generator, a manifesting generator. I'm like, yeah, but are you doing things that satisfy you? So that is the sacral. It is connected to life force. It is all about responding. So it really needs something to respond to. And it's also about sexuality. The glands or organs that are connected to it, well, in this case, again, glands, are ovaries and testes. So would you like to share something about this regarding, for example,
my
your
ovaries?
Husband? Yeah, that too.
Yeah, so my husband is a 6/2 sacral generator, and damn, I use his life force energy, and like not in like a sexual kind of way, guys, like in a I need to get shit done kind of way. Get your mind out of the gutter. But like there are times where, especially when I was working on my master's, right, like I needed to get homework done and I did not want to do it because it's not something that I was particularly stoked about project-wise, but he could be playing video games and I would literally just sit next to him and like boom, 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 bang it out. And honestly, now looking back, in college, I would do the same because he was more into like console gaming then and not like computer gaming. So we would just both be sitting on the couch because that was my preferred area of homeworking, like homework, not like working from home. And I would just like sit on the couch, like knock out a 10-page paper while he's like playing Destiny on the PlayStation. And I didn't recognize it then, but I was able to get things done because of being in his presence. Also, as a non-sacral being, I really love going to a coffee shop and mooching off of other people's energy, because statistically, there's got to be a generator or a manifesting generator around me when I'm sitting at a coffee shop. So if I really need to get something done, that's my preferred place of working, rather than my home office where I'm just sitting by myself next to my plant. So those are my insights as a non-sacral being into what the sacral center feels like. But also, knowing when enough is enough of that sacral energy, I think, is really important as a non-sacral being, because it's going to feel like you're an Energizer bunny and you can keep going, right? As we mentioned earlier in this episode, when Miko and I are together, we have the sacral. And now, an hour and a half into recording this episode, I'm feeling my eyes start to close. And we're getting close to the end, so it's going to be okay. But I know if I had to go for another 2 hours, I would need a snack. And that's just the reality of it. So it's really important to know what is your energy and what isn't your energy, and when it's being defined, right? And using it for small amounts of time rather than hours upon hours upon hours.
Yeah, very well said. So yeah, even the smooching the sacral energy from others, you need to understand that this is not yours. Very, very, very important statement that she just shared with us, because you can't go on like this forever, not for a very long time even, without ending up feeling burnt out. So just be mindful of that when you're doing that, you still need your rest. And if you're sacrally undefined, it is recommended to work around 3 to 5 hours a day, not more. However, it also all depends on the rest of your chart, as always. So that's just a rough estimate. And if you do have it defined, then find things that satisfy you. That's so important. And another fun fact when it comes to the sacral, so yes, Celestina mentioned it, that this is not about sexual energy when it comes to smooching off from her husband, but it really actually is. So the interesting thing here is that a generator or manifesting generator, they need something to respond to. So if you have a partner that is defined there, or if you are defined yourself, then explain this to your partner, because it's important to get these triggers. It's important that the generator or manifesting generator has a trigger to be sexual, for example. So the other side of this coin is that the person that is undefined in the relationship, if you are in such a dynamic, that they may seem like they are the more sexual one, because they are taking in the energy and they are amplifying it. So they may look like they're craving sex all the time, and they're just taking the energy from the other and are amplifying it. So if a non-sacral being is by themselves, I personally can go very easily without having such a strong need to have sex. So I can be very much at peace when my partner is not around me. When I am around my partner, it's a very, very different story. So this is what I personally feel when it comes to that kind of energy. And it's also interesting to know this, just that we can sometimes take it to the next level. So we can become sex addicts, and understanding that this is a dynamic that plays a role in us, it's very, very useful and helpful. And also understanding that sometimes the planets are defining us in that area as well. So we may have periods where we feel more sexual, just like everyone and everything in this lifetime. There are just times and periods where we feel something more and feel something less. So yeah, I just wanted to burst your bubble. Just a little bit.
No, it's all good. It's all good. I think the other important note here, just like living with someone who's a sacral being, like I've noticed in the past, I don't know, like couple of months, he's not super stoked on his job right now. So he does come home significantly more exhausted because he's not excited about the work that he's doing, and will like need to take like a 30-minute nap, or will be asleep by like 10 o'clock. Granted, my husband's days are long, but like he just doesn't have the same capacity as he did when he was doing a job that he actually enjoyed. So I think that that really speaks volumes to being passionate about what you're responding to as a sacral being, and not just like if you have the luxury of being able to choose the work in front of you and choose projects, amazing, right? Choose what's going to light you up. But if you're in a position where you're being told to do things or projects are being given to you like indiscriminately, then it can be harder, right? But I think finding the small pieces of joy in that is really important. On the opposite side of the coin, when you are doing something that really lights you up, at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you've run through that battery fully, right? So maybe that's using that energy for sex. Maybe that's using that energy to like go for a run or whatever it is. But making sure your battery is like donezo at the end of the day is really important. Because let me tell you, sleeping next to a sacral being as a non-sacral being who's not tired, like the sacral being is not tired, it literally feels like I'm sleeping next to a battery, and it sucks.
Yep, let's just be blunt about it.
Yeah, I feel like I'm sleeping next to a battery, and then my sleep is shit until he leaves the next morning, and then I get 3 hours of sleep from like 6 to 9, and I'm like, okay, world, I can kind of do you today. Let's go.
Yes, very, very important point as well. If you are in a relationship with a sacral being, yes, very true. Just a lot of times it's recommended to either sleep separately or to have an hour separately before going to bed. So the non-sacral being goes to bed before the sacral being, or vice versa, and staying in bed for at least an hour longer as well. So what you're doing is totally understandable and seems to be a good defense mechanism of your body, where it's like, no, I just need a bit more rest.
Oh yeah. And if not, yes, we have a great pull-out bed in this room, so it's fine.
Very good. And generators definitely need to power themselves out, release all that energy physically. Manifesting generators need to do it both physically and mentally. So you need to exhaust both of these elements, and then you have a more restful sleep. You and also your partner, the undefined and defined person.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I think we wrapped that up pretty well. That was great.
Yes. Now comes the emotional solar plexus. That is one of the most complex ones, and we're also going to be sharing the emotional waves on our Instagram, just to make it a bit shorter and not so complex, because there are different kinds of waves that you can experience if you have this defined. And if this is defined in your chart, this is automatically your inner authority. So this is really a center that is super, super strong and powerful. It is about the emotions. So would you like to share what it feels like to be undefined in this area?
Yeah, so this is actually a really interesting one for me. So I have 4 gates coming out of my emotional solar plexus, but they're all undefined. Or they're all unconscious, rather. So it's very interesting to feel emotions unconsciously, but then also amplify other people's emotions. So the way, I think I explained this in like the last episode that we did, probably episode 2, where I was living with my parents again as a grown-ass adult. Highly don't recommend. But they are both emotional authorities, and I now know that, so I think it made it easier to live with them as an adult. But I amplify other people's emotions, especially for both of my parents, who are extra like 90% of the time. And it must have been a very interesting, like, abrupt entrance into the world, like my entrance into the world for them. I'm sure I like shook up their world, right? And like their emotions were probably crazy with me as a screaming, crying newborn. I can only imagine. But yeah, it's really interesting to recognize, because I have to keep my emotions in check when I know I'm around other people who have an emotional authority, right? Because if my emotions aren't in check, I can heighten and amplify what they're feeling based off of what I'm feeling, and then it just turns into like absolute mayhem depending on what we're talking about or what the situation is. But I think it really helps knowing it and knowing who I'm around and what the topics of conversation are to help keep the emotions at like a neutral state rather than like having this really intense peak of emotions. Yeah. So that's what it feels like being undefined and also having unconscious gates coming out of it. It's wild. But I think I also understand emotions because of those unconscious gates, which is really helpful, you know?
Yeah, you are mentioning something very interesting here. Yes, when you have gates coming out of a center, it gives you kind of a way into that center to understand the themes of that center.
Yeah.
With emotions, depending on which gates are defined, this would be your major connection to what emotions feel like, both on the shadow aspects as well as the light aspects. And yeah, with the undefined emotional solar plexus, you can be called the drama queen, because if you don't understand this, if you don't understand that you have this undefined and you take in the emotions of others, and for example, if someone comes in and they're feeling sad, you may be the one that starts crying. If someone comes in and they feel some kind of joy inside, but they're not laughing, you may just crack up and start laughing. So this is kind of how the emotionally undefined center works. If you're completely open in that center, I find it super interesting because I've seen quite a few clients that were completely open in that center, and they feel like a bit like they don't have a clear connection to the emotions from the get-go. So this is something that develops throughout life. It kind of feels like there's a cotton ball around their emotions, which they don't understand. I don't really want to say it, so don't feel like you have the tendency. But to me, it seems like they're a bit sociopathic in a way, or autistic more. It doesn't mean that you are. It's just for me to explain what I'm trying to say here, that you don't understand emotions well from the get-go. You need to learn to understand emotions. And there's a book from Brené Brown that I always recommend, where she really explains all kinds of emotions. All the emotional spectrum is defined in this book. And to just grab this book and go through it, if you have an emotionally undefined or even completely open child, for example, this is a great exercise that you can do with your child, just to go through this book page by page, maybe one page every evening or one emotion every evening, and try to have them explain when they experience this emotion or how that emotion feels to them or something like this, because it's going to help them connect more to emotions in general. And usually the older you get, it becomes easier and easier. You get to understand the plethora of emotions. But yeah, I just feel like sometimes when it's completely open or undefined, it just feels like emotions are a bit harder to understand.
Do you have any channels? No, you have gates coming out of there, though, yeah?
I have gates coming out of it, yeah. And
Yeah.
funny enough, no one in our family has it defined.
Interesting.
So, and
Your
even
household
both
must
of
have
my
been chill.
parents. Yeah. I mean, also sometimes if someone would come back from school or from work and they would have emotions still stuck in them, you would still bring them home. So it can still... but yeah, it was... I mean, we are a pretty mellow family. However, we do... I think my brother and I, we define our emotional solar plexus. And both my parents are completely open.
Oh, wow.
So, and it also shows in different ways, also because of all the things that they've gone through in their life. So it is very interesting to just see the different forms of conditioning in this as well.
Yeah. There's definitely some, I think, people-pleasing tendencies with completely open emotional solar plexus. Like shooting on yourself and people-pleasing, right?
This to me fits better. It fits better into the emotional solar plexus than the will center. So the will center to me feels more about I'm not good enough. So trying to prove yourself all the time. And the emotional solar plexus is you try to avoid receiving the brunt of emotions that the other person may feel. So you try to please others, or you try to avoid conflict in order to avoid receiving all of these emotions fired back at you. So yeah, people pleasing can fall into that category because you just don't want to feel all of that.
Yeah. I think the one that I understand the least is a defined root. So I'm excited to dive into this. Out of everything we've talked about, literally a defined root is what I understand the least, because I don't have one.
Yep, I get that. The funny thing is, when I first encountered human design, because I'm so open or undefined, I'm so undefined in all the lower areas. And now that I'm hearing myself say that, you can, the listener or even you can hear how particular I'm always being about being undefined or open, because it's being interchanged so many times in human design. So I'm just trying to be extra careful in these aspects, because I think it's important, especially when you're listening and you're not watching it, to understand these differences in future episodes, at least when we're going through charts, to just say open versus undefined versus completely open.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, when I first started human design, I couldn't really connect to the lower gates. It was so interesting. And I also couldn't place them. So it took so long for me to remember which gates are in the lower ones. I do have 38, 39. So for me, this is in my sun and my earth. So it's a very, very important definition in my chart. But I couldn't connect to gates coming from the sacral, emotional solar plexus, root, and spleen a lot of times. I was blind to them. So the root center, it's about stress, and it's also about adrenaline. It's got to do with the glands, the adrenal glands, and if you have it defined, you're basically producing the stress within yourself. You're creating the stress within yourself. So defined roots, what I always say when I see a defined root, you need your deadlines. You need to have someone telling you, okay, finish this until then. And then a defined root will usually, it always depends on the rest of your design, of course, but they will usually only start working on this thing that they need to deliver on the last day. That's exaggerated, but they're really pushing it to the last minute before they're even getting started in working on this thing. And with an undefined root, for me personally, I can't do that. I mean, I may push it a few days, but I can't do that. I want to finish the work as soon as I can. So this is why they say that an undefined root is a great slave, because you can just place one thing onto their desk and another thing and another thing and another thing, and they will just keep going until they finish their work. So I think with us, it also plays a role to have a defined will center, of course. But when you have an undefined root or open root, it's really about receiving the pressure from outside. And I can feel it so much when I'm around my brother. It stresses me out so much when he is stressed. I can feel it, and the whole house feels it. Like he's got such a strong root because he's got 2 channels going to the spleen, so it's really, really heavy. But yeah, this is my experience with defined versus undefined. What is yours?
I have very little. I was just looking through all of my like family's charts. My husband doesn't have a defined root. My mom doesn't have a defined root. And my dad does. And his is, okay, so he has the 3955 as a channel. And actually, he has the whole fucking stream. So like when he's in a mood, he's in a whole ass mood. And what's really interesting, so he has the stream, right? So that means, like, for you guys listening, the 3955 going from the root to the emotional solar plexus, and then he has the 2212 going from the emotional solar plexus to the throat. But neither of them are, like, they're half conscious, half unconscious. So, like, if he's in a mood, he doesn't even know he's in a mood. My mom and I know he's in a mood, and then we just ignore him. So it's very interesting because it feels, I've learned to ignore it, I think, in my 30 plus years of life. But it's just it's very heavy. It's very dense. And because his is connected emotionally, it's very emotionally driven. And that's probably the opposite of what you're feeling with your brother being splenic. Right? So it's very heavy, it's very emotional, and he just kind of gets in a funk that we can't explain, but my mom and I now know, like, if that's happening, to just leave him be. And it's nothing that we did, it's whatever he's dealing with internally. And that's the heaviness. And I don't know any other way to explain it other than heaviness.
And that stream of your father is individual, so what you're describing is probably also melancholy.
Oh, yeah.
So when a person is individually defined, it's actually good to just leave them be, and also for him to sit with it. Because if he's going to try to define why he feels like that, if you're going to ask him, why do you feel like that? What is going on with you? Like, this is not going to help. He just needs to sit with it and not try to define what it is that he's feeling. Just also get involved into something creative is super helpful. But I can imagine that being heavy, and
it's really intense. And I think, again, my parents not knowing about human design throughout most of their marriage, I've only really introduced it to them like the last 2 years, but giving my mom these insights has allowed her the space, because he's also a 6'2", right? So I'm sure some of that is him going into like hardcore hermit mode with his emotions. And my mom's a 2-line, she's a 2-4, right? So they have different unsynced hermit modes and need for hermit modes. So rather than just getting pissed that he's in hermit mode when she's in like community, like get out there, go get it kind of mode, I think she's at least been able to see like, hey, okay, cool, he's in hermit mode. I was in hermit mode last week or whatever. I need to respect that he's in this way now, and I just need to give him space and kind of ignore him, right? Rather than getting pissed off. So I think from a relation standpoint, if you know this about your partner, it can be really insightful into why they are the way they are, and they're not necessarily pissed off at you. It just might be something that they're dealing with internally that they can't vocalize, right? And they may not know why it's happening, especially if they don't know about their design.
Very well said. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, that also concludes the centers.
We did it.
Yes. These are just the centers without even really going through the inner authorities too much.
I think we can hop through those and probably go through a more in-depth episode of those.
Okay. Then we've come to the end.
We went on some tangents, but I think this is a really good foundation for you guys. We went pretty deep into all of the centers, particularly the ones that we understand ourselves. I think we went a little bit deeper on, but I feel like that's natural. So if you have any insights that you guys want to share about what you feel in the centers that you have defined or undefined, again, hit us up on Instagram at Heartcore HD. Amazing. Hit us up on the gram, shoot us a message, a voice message if you feel so inclined, because that's my favorite kind. Oh, and you can listen on 2X now on Instagram. Exciting times, guys.
Thank God.
Yes, I know. So, yeah, we would just love to hear your insights. And if you give us permission, we can play them on here just so that we can share that with our community too, so that they can gain better insights into what each of these feels like. Because really, all we know is our own experience, right? We can read all the things in the books. We can listen to other people's experiences, but I think it really helps to share what we've experienced as well. So feel free to share that.
Yes. Love that. Well, thank you everyone for listening. And I do hope we're going to get some of those voice messages so that we can play them on here. I like that.
Why not?
Thank you so much and have a beautiful rest of your week.
Yeah. Ciao, guys.
Hardcore, the Human Design Podcast.